Welcome to the Open Matters podcast. My name's Richard Brock, and today we're digging into something deceptively simple: copy and paste. You do it dozens of times a day, but have you ever thought about what's going on behind the scenes every time you copy a website URL, email address, or what about your passwords? Is it wise for every app on your phone or website to have access to your clipboard? The man with the answers today is Miklos Vajna, longtime open source contributor, Collabora Online engineer, and apparent programming machine, clocking in nearly 2,000 contributions on GitHub last year. So let's find out what really happens when you copy and paste in a browser, and why getting it right is trickier than it seems. Miklos, welcome to the podcast. This week's podcast, we're going to be talking about cut, copy, and paste in browsers. For those who don't know who you are, could you just introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. I am quite interested in contributing to open source projects and building our Collabora Online product on top of the open source code. I have been working on LibreOffice and Collabora Online for over a decade by now. Just like everyone else, I have my own silly hobbies like contributing to OpenStreetMap and solving the Rubik's Cube. And I happened to work a little last year on the Collabora Online copy-paste support.
Fantastic, thank you. I saw that last year you had just over 1,800 contributions on GitHub. So you've been a busy.
It's possible that's an overstatement. Perhaps it's counting every crease throw that you press while you have the GitHub page open.
You should aim for 2,000 in 2025. So thank you for joining us. And yes, we're going to talk about copy and paste in browsers. But before we get there, I thought it was interesting to look a bit about the history. I was looking this up just earlier. The terminology is originally from manuscript editing, so where you would manually cut a paragraph out from a newspaper or a book, whatever it might be, and paste it onto a new page. And apparently they made editing scissors that would be 20 or even 30 centimeters long, so that you could cut something out very evenly. It would be very smart. And then, of course, in the 20th century, as copy paper, carbon paper, and photocopiers came around, then we introduced the term copying. But we're not here to talk about paper. We're here to talk about modern technology. Can you just tell us a little bit about how cut and copy and paste first started on computers, and what's the sort of story about how that's evolved?
Yeah, sure. So probably every user has that magic day when they want to use more than one app in parallel on a computer. And you have that information here, but not over there. So you want to somehow transfer that. And copy paste is a good way to do that. Make a selection, copy it, paste it. And usually it just works and you don't need to think about the details. But behind the scenes, what happens is that you have some information in one app. You make a selection, like you select the subset of that information. You make a partial export to some kind of file format. And then on the other side, you do an import of that file format into an existing document, picture, or something. And that's how it kind of works on the desktop. And we try to have the same functionality in browsers, but people have expectations on security when it comes to browsers. And then it's very interesting how you can try to have a good middle ground between usability and security.
So the way I understand this, help me if I'm wrong here, previously on desktop and offline applications, there were fewer concerns about security because your desktop document editor didn't have access to the internet. There was less worry about your information being copied and pasted out into, out of your control. Whereas as things moved online and got into browsers, this became more of an issue. Is that right?
There is some truth in that, and also these programs perhaps had internet access, but it all started by having a standalone personal computer. So obviously it had nothing other than the power cable and perhaps a monitor. And then it sounded like a good idea to plug in a networked cable, and nobody thought about the downsides.
So can you just help us understand a little bit before we move on? What are some of these downsides? What are the dangers and the vulnerabilities that we are trying to stay away from as we implement copy and paste in a browser?
Right. So it's quite similar for mobile apps and browsers. In both of these environments, what you expect is that when you paste your piece of information from some other app, then you do some user interaction, and then you read from the clipboard. But it should not happen just in the background. So just because you open some website, it should not happen that it reads your clipboard every minute and it sends the data somewhere else. Imagine that you are copying your password from a password manager to paste that a second later. And in this time frame, some other web page is just randomly reading the clipboard. That would not be good.
So the clipboard is something that sort of lives on the browser. That's right. And originally, when we first had browsers, the browser had full access.
Yeah, I imagine that the very initial browser had no restriction here, because these are always added after the fact when some very, very bad thing happened. But the clipboard is a sharing place where you can write some information and then you can read that later. And you want to make sure that the good guys can read from it and the bad guys can't. And differentiating between the two is a bit tricky.
So going with that, how do we differentiate between the two? How do we know if this is a good guy trying to copy and paste their password to log into their email account, or how do we know if it's a bad guy who is trying to take your password from your environment?
So browsers had two generations here. There was the first generation where browsers try to figure this out automatically for you. Their idea was that in case there is some user interaction, like a mouse click is in progress, then probably it's really you who wanted to paste, so read from the clipboard. Otherwise, probably it's not you. It turns out this is not really playing nicely with complex asynchronous web apps like Collabora Online, and I'm sure there are also others. So just during the past year, it became a reality that we have an asynchronous clipboard in browsers, in Chrome, Firefox, elsewhere, Safari elsewhere. And that's now a bit different. You get a usual permission pop-up, which is quite familiar to you when you ever use a meeting software to access your camera or microphone. Similar to that, now you get a pop-up if you want to permanently give clipboard access to Collabora Online, and then you paste from that, and it works.
Okay, so as you're saying, in a similar way to in this video call where we say allow microphone access, we can also grant access to specific browser apps, whether it be your document editor like Collabora Online or something else, and we say we trust this. There's another thing that I think you've been working on a lot, which is different formatting standards and the way that different text documents or spreadsheets are stored. Can you help us explain how you got around some of those problems in copying from Google Docs to Collabora Online or from Microsoft Word or whatever it might be? Can you help us understand more of that?
Yeah, sure. So when you copy from one app and you paste to another app, then you need some kind of common language between these two so that they can agree on what's the best format, which can be used for copy paste, something that can be produced in some other software, something that Collabora Online understands. In worst case, it will be plain text, but hopefully it can be something better. And again, there was this dialogue between the processes and in the old desktop copy paste, and in the browser, basically everyone went with HTML, which is fine, except it's a bit unfortunate that previously in the desktop environment, RTF was the primary clipboard format. So we have a change there, and that's a bit problematic.
RTF, that's rich text documents.
Rich text format, it's from the 80s. It's a very early format, and there was no HTML back then. And there are cases where plain text and RTF is supported, but the HTML is not, and that is a bit of a problem. But don't worry, we came up with an idea how to still have a very good user experience here. Even if we only have plain text and HTML, what we can do is that we put a little marker in the HTML, and we say that this HTML is coming from Collabora Online. And in case you are pasting between two Collabora Online documents, then we can still call back and ask for the ODF version. And with ODF, we can do a perfect copy paste. And this is completely transparent to you. You don't have to know that ODF was used there. It just works. If you want to copy something complex like charts between calc documents, then it will work nicely. And it's not really working in other HTML-based Office sheets.
So, for example, if I was working with someone else who was using Google Sheets, that's a .g sheet file. Is that right?
But still, like the clipboard will go via HTML because everyone does that via HTML. But what Google Sheets started to do is that they kind of annotate their spreadsheet content with additional metadata, so that it tells us it's a formula, it's a Boolean value, it's a number, it's a text. And that's something that now we also handle when you paste. So in case you are pasting a formula from Google Sheets to Collabora Online, that it used to be just the calculated value as text. So instead of formula, you got a number. Instead of a number, finally you got text. And now we try to do this as you would expect.
And I'm sure there'll be lots of people who will be happy to know that. It's quite important when
we happen to also. Yeah, we also happen to document that in our SDK. So in case there are anybody else who wants to have that working, then they can look at our documentation, what we understand from that markup so far, and they can implement the same. So it will be easier for others.
It's interesting to me when you think about the history of how this has come from, because I tend to think more like scissors cutting something and moving it, but actually to realize there's a lot more information that must be transferred, and it's not even just whether it's bold or italic. You've got all the different styling. Is this heading 1? How is it indented? Yeah, like you say, the different sort of data types for spreadsheets. How many significant figures should be displayed? There's a huge amount going on there.
Yeah, and also it's not just about the data types. There are other things that when you copy paste inside the same document, then you might want to do something smart, like in Collabora Online Calc, when you do cut and paste, then we will rewrite the other formulas according to your operation, so that basically your formula keeps working, even if your formula was moved around. And for that, we need to know if it was us who was writing something to the clipboard, and it's our own data coming back versus not. This is the knowing if we are still the owner of the clipboard or not. And again, this had an explicit API for desktop copy paste, and for browsers we need to find out how to do this, because for security reasons you don't get a notification when somebody else was writing to the clipboard, because we don't want web pages to spy on you. But then we still need to do this formula rewriting, because people expect that. And with this putting a marker in the HTML, this is now working nicely in Collabora Online.
You mentioned browsers then at the end again. Are all browsers the same? Are they all working beautifully hand in hand with each other, or is it more complicated than that?
So right now, since about August last year, we are at a quite good place. All the major browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Safari are implementing the second generation asynchronous clipboard, and that we prefer to use. So at the moment, the clipboard area is working quite consistently. It was worse before, like about a year ago. There was much more inconsistency there. And that was problematic. Luckily, these days, it's reasonably consistent.
What do you feel are the areas that still need to be worked on?
So in general, I think we are at a quite happy place. We used to have almost no copy-paste support. Then we had something which was a bit broken, but at least was working for simple cases. And nowadays, what we have is the almost perfect case. So that's quite encouraging, I would say. One small area which would be nice to have is still that in case you have legacy desktop applications with important data, and you want to transfer the data to web apps like Collabora Online, and you want to copy from those apps, emitting plain text and RTF, and you want to paste that to Collabora Online, then in web apps, in Collabora Online, you don't get RTF, and that's the primary copy-paste format for desktop apps. So that's a missing piece. We don't have access to that RTF. It's not a blocker. It's not something that affects you on a daily basis, but that would be nice to have. To have browsers give access to formats other than the top few, like plain text and HTML.
And that's a browser-based issue. That's not to do with...
Exactly. For browsers, this is easier for security this way. They have a low list of a few top formats. They know how to sanitize nasty, not wanted markup from those formats before they hand the data to us. And it's easier for them to not provide RTF.
Wonderful. Miklos, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I found that very interesting. I've learned quite a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners will have also.
You're welcome. Looking forward to what other episodes this podcast will have.